yes. But then, how is the universe an event? You went from universe to, oh, there must be an event that caused that was the beginning of the universe. So now I can say, all right, there's God. Well, there must be an event that was the beginning of God.
Right.
So I think, let me finish this. If you say everything has a cause, you can't exempt God from it. Or, the other observation is that actually we can observe certain things here that in our world that do not have causes, like in quantum physics, there are some quantum events that have not direct causes. So that also undermines your argument.
Well, okay, 2 points here. First of all, let me just restate the argument that I gave. All events have causes. The beginning of the universe, I didn't say the universe was an event, I said the beginning of the universe is an event. Therefore, the beginning of the universe was caused. So I don't think that your representation of the argument was, I think you said it was a straw man. Secondly, in reference to quantum, is anybody here a physicist who deals with quantum physics? How many different interpretations are there of quantum physics?
Quantum physics?
Of quantum physics? At least 7? I have heard as high as 10. Only one of those approaches, the Copenhagen theory, am I correct on this? Just feel free to correct me on this. Only the Copenhagen theory actually postulates the possibility. And even there, it's a question whether this is a metaphysical issue or an epistemological issue. So I don't, even if that's the case, let's just for the sake of argument's sake, you're right, that there's uncaused events. Okay? I could easily restate that argument and say all caused objects have causes. And I think the argument still work.
Well, but you're making the question now by selectively saying, well, there's some objects that do have causes and some don't, and you.
What's wrong with that?
And what?
What's wrong with that? With acknowledging there's possibility
you
of a
just
cause?
define God as not needing a cause. Well, how do you know that?
Well, that would be that's how most people have understood God to be, is uncaused.
Well, but there's no reason to assume that. That's just a gratuitous assumption there.
Why not? I mean,
okay. So, all right.
I mean, unless you're making an argument here, or unless you're making an argument. Okay, are you making an argument that everything that exists must have a cause?
I'm not making the cause argument. You are making this.
Right.
I'm saying if you want to prove that something exists, you have to provide evidence for it.
Right. And what I'm saying is, where in my argument, as I presented it, where is the argument wrong?
Well, where's the evidence? What is the evidence for this?
Beginning of the universe.
How is that? And there could be some super alien population that runs on a.
But would that super alien population live outside the universe? Because once again, we're talking about the beginning of the universe.
Yeah, sure. We're just a simulation.
So we have another universe outside the universe.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let you entertain that possibility, but how plausible is it?
Well, how now that we're talking. I'm not saying this is plausible. I'm saying this is implausible.
Right, and what I'm saying is, when we look at the empirical evidence for the universe, it suggests it has a beginning. Doesn't that naturally raise the question, what initiated the beginning of the universe? It can't be itself, it has to be something outside the universe.
Well, there are some people who argue actually it's a closed manifold, and physicists maybe can comment on that. But so I'm not making this argument. I'm saying you have to present some observations here in this world that point to God, and you don't.
But why? When you say observations, you mean direct observations?
Direct or indirect?
Well, I just appealed to it, indirect observation. The beginning of the universe.
Okay, so
we're basing upon just like when I worked in nuclear physics. During the entire time, I never actually saw an atom. I know that's hard to believe, but I never did. Okay. Now, what I'm saying to you is how I knew that fission was occurring was based upon indirect observation. What I'm suggesting in terms of the cosmological argument and the arguments from design, these are not direct observations, these are indirect observations based upon the features of the universe.
All right, so I think we can make progress here, but just assuming certain things because you need them for your theory. I mean, this has been done also repeatedly, and those things had to be rejected. For example, there was this theory of phlogiston or ether,
sure.
Right? So phlogiston was assumed to be part of combustible objects to make combustion work, and ether the carrier of light, and all these theories had to be thrown out after new knowledge came in. So we don't know what the origin of the universe is. So
now you're appealing to ignorance.
Well, I'm saying, shall we therefore jump to the conclusion that there's a God who caused it if we don't know really what it was? No, I'm saying until we don't have good evidence for something, we shouldn't believe it.
Well, once again, what I'm saying is, I'm not jumping to the conclusion. I'm not saying I can prove that God is the only possible explanation. I'm saying, doesn't this point out the insufficiency of naturalism? That naturalism cannot explain, is not a sufficient explanation for our universe. It cannot explain the origin of the universe.
So maybe we should move on to another point. You want to ask one? I have more.
Professor Gurney, do you have a question?
I have a number of questions here. Let's see. Yeah, I want to go back to this issue about evidence. Because I think, once again, I find your appeal to certain proofs, I think they, like I said, they presuppose naturalism. And so once again, for me, the question is, if we are interested in truth, if we really want to know what's true, then what we have to do is we can't beg the question. We can't say, well, I'm going to stilt the evidence toward one view or the other. And what I'm saying is, when you cannot, if consciousness does not appear to be something that's physical, and I think there are good reasons. It's not ignorance. It's reasons for believing it. I mean, I don't disagree that there are correlations with brain states. What I'm suggesting is that consciousness cannot be fully described by physical events. And you'll find most philosophers in the philosophy of mind will acknowledge that. Colin, again, for example, he's a naturalist. So is John Searle. They both would say, we cannot explain these things physically.
So first of all, you come back to this thing with which we had already dealt with, I thought, and then you were accusing me of a fallacy of strawman. Now I have one for you, namely the argument from authority or the numerum fallacy, bringing in many people who say something. So I think that is not a very good argument. I say to you, naturalistic or a view based on evidence is what works. Science is what works. See what science has produced. The fact that we can sit here, the fact that we're, how old we get, is all a product of science. And why does science work? Well, because you do not make assumptions based without evidence. You develop theories. The theories are testable. The theories are falsifiable. And nothing of the like have I seen in your theory about God. I mean, how do we know? That's one of the questions I had. How do we know that your theory is wrong, for example? Or would you admit that you could be wrong about your?
Oh, I'll admit I could be wrong.
Okay. So when would you know that? How would you decide that?
Well, in the same way that I would be falsified in terms of any scientific theory, when the evidence overwhelms, makes it implausible. For example, if we can give natural explanations, sufficiently natural explanations, and I would challenge you, even with Daniel Dennett. I've read Daniel Dennett. I know Daniel Dennett's position, and he's very careful. He's not saying we can prove physical explanation. He says these are possible correlations. So I think they're, once again, I'm not just appealing to I would appeal to their arguments, not just to the authority. And if we wanted to, we could go through John Searle's Chinese room argument, for example, which I think shows that we cannot, what's called a functionalist view of the mind, cannot explain consciousness. And so,
so how does that prove in any way any of the features that are attributed to the Christian God? That he loves you and that he can forgive sins and that Jesus is his son?
Well, do we have to prove everything with one argument? I mean, that's unreasonable, isn't it?
Well, but you're doing the bait and switch strategy here. You're trying to convince us that there might be a deistic notion of God, which I have no problem with. But we're talking about a theistic God, a God that tells us what to do, who cares about what we eat on Fridays, how long our beards are, whom we have sex with and when. Right? And so how can you derive this from the fact that we can't fully explain consciousness today? That I don't understand.
Once again, I didn't just appeal to consciousness, I appealed to the existence of humanity, the improbability.
You appealed to consciousness twice.
Well, I know, and because I'm trying to keep it where we can actually have a substantive argument rather than just making appeals to various, like, how long is your beard and what God says. It seems to me, once again, in any kind of philosophical or rational analysis of anything, you start out with the basic building blocks and you develop. I think it's interesting you brought up phlogiston, because if anything, that demonstrates that even science itself changes. And it's interesting to me that Lavoisier, who came up with the oxygenation theory of combustion, was a theist. In fact, most of the early scientists were theists. And a significant part of their confidence that science could give us a truthful understanding of the world was based upon their theistic commitments. And here's why I think why. Because if all science, all natural, all empirical studies presuppose certain suppositions, just to give one of them, how do you know that the external world is real? You cannot, as a scientist, prove that without begging the question. Because to appeal to any kind of empirical considerations begs the question. It presupposes what you're trying to establish. And so what I'm arguing here is that even science relies upon non-empirical philosophical assumptions. So the question here is, when we look at claims about God, claims about religious experience, for example, we have to start with what are the basic presuppositions. Now, I would suggest to you that in terms of the cosmological argument, as well as the argument from design, it does presuppose certain things, namely a personal God, okay, who is a rational, conscious agent. So that would reject pantheism, could reject panentheism. So it does narrow it down.
Okay, so many points you made here. First of all, I agree that with science, we have certain things that we have to assume as given, certain axioms. So for example, that the inductive method works, and we can prove it. Or certain arguments about logic, that logic works. But that is not faith, and that's an equivocation of the notion of faith.
Why do you think so?
I would call it more trust.
Well, that's what I think faith is.
Well, that's not what I would distinguish between faith in the existence of God and trust that something works because it has proved to work in the past. So that's that remark. The other thing is that many scientists were theists. I mean, in the Middle Ages, the churches had the money, right? Who could afford to do research on their own? And even here, you have to be very careful in what you say to not offend people and not to jeopardize funding. If you want to again talk about bring the number argument, if you look at the belief level, it goes down with scientists have a much lower belief level than the average American. And if you go to the Academy of Sciences, only 7% believe in a personal God. So I think that number argument in scientists, I think you're going to lose. And then finally, you brought it up 2 or 3 times, the argument from design. So the world is so complicated that it needs a designer. Well, the obvious question is, of course, who designed the designer? Right? The designer has to be at least as complex as our world. Otherwise, he couldn't do it. So who designed the designer? And that you can't explain. And 200 years, in 1 month, exactly, from today, Charles Darwin was born. And he gave us the principle of evolution. He identified that. And that is a beautiful explanation of how something complicated that looks as if it were designed can evolve from something simple. And so this design argument is actually not needed. You don't need this explanation of the designer.
Let me appeal to authority for a moment, then give you an argument. Antony Flew was probably the most well-known prolific atheist philosopher. In 2004, it was widely announced in the media that he now believes in God. His argument has always been, if you read Flew and his works going all the way back to the 1950s, show me the evidence. Very similar to what you're arguing here. He said the reason is because he felt that there was growing evidence, namely from the argument of design. In fact, he criticized Richard Dawkins. Surprise. Because one of the things he points out about that Dawkins overlooks is that even Darwin himself, in The Origin of the Species, talks about the difficulty of accounting for reproduction and how is it these things are able to reproduce in terms of as an explanation.